Michael Jordan's son finds a box in the attic. What's inside changes everything they knew about him. Marcus Jordan walked into the attic of his family's estate with an unshakable sense of duty. His parents were out of town, and he had been tasked with cleaning out an old storage unit that had gathered dust for years. He didn't expect much, a few boxes of old memorabilia, family records, and other things that had no particular meaning to him. But as he moved aside an old couch cushion, something caught his eye. A small, worn wooden box was tucked under a pile of old newspapers. It wasn't much to look at, just a plain, slightly chipped wooden box with a rusty latch. But Marcus felt a strange pull toward it. Maybe it was the fact that his father, Michael Jordan, was such a towering figure in the world, or maybe it was just curiosity. Whatever it was, Marcus carefully opened the box, wondering what was inside. The first thing he saw was a stack of yellowed letters tied together with a frayed string. He didn't recognize the handwriting. He sifted through the pile and pulled out a few, reading the first one aloud in his head. It was a letter from his father, written when he was still in college, a time before he became the Michael Jordan the world knew. The words were raw, almost unfiltered. It spoke of his struggles with the pressure of expectations and the doubt that haunted him as he worked toward greatness. Marcus felt a pang in his chest. He'd always known his father as the relentless competitor, the man who had never allowed himself to show weakness. The stories of Michael's toughness, his ability to ignore pain, and his refusal to quit were well known. His public persona was larger than life. But these letters painted a different picture. These were not the words of a confident, undefeated champion. They were the thoughts of a young man full of fear, uncertainty, and longing for something deeper than basketball success. Marcus carefully folded the letter back and picked up another. It was dated a few years later, after Michael had already entered the NBA. Again, the writing was similar, expressing moments of exhaustion, loneliness, and the toll that fame had taken on his personal life. Marcus read on, each word pulling him deeper into his father's world, the one he had never known. Michael's letter to his parents, written just after his first season with the Chicago Bulls, was particularly revealing. He confessed that he missed his family but felt trapped by the weight of his obligations. The pressure to perform, the endless media attention, and the need to always be on had isolated him. He mentioned his regret over missing family events, birthdays, and special moments, all in the name of becoming the best. Michael had always been open about his ambition, but reading this, Marcus felt the depth of the sacrifice it had demanded. Marcus's heart sank. He had spent his entire life in the shadow of his father's legacy, never fully understanding the strain it had placed on him. To everyone else, Michael Jordan was the symbol of basketball perfection, an icon who could do no wrong. But this was the side of him that no one saw. It was a side that no one ever cared to acknowledge because it didn't fit the narrative of the perfect, untouchable legend. He put the letters down for a moment, his mind racing. The thoughts he had always held about his father, the ideals he had been raised with, all seemed to come crashing down. His father wasn't just a symbol of victory. He wasn't just a living legend. Michael Jordan had been a man who fought his own battles, endured unimaginable pressures, and paid a price for his success. For years, Marcus had been consumed by the notion that he had to live up to his father's greatness. But now, seeing this vulnerable side of Michael, he felt as if he didn't know who his father really was anymore. Marcus turned to the next item in the box, a worn journal. He flipped through it slowly, reading the entries. The earliest ones were filled with reflections on his childhood, his upbringing in North Carolina, and his determination to become a great basketball player. But as the years passed, the entries grew darker. Michael wrote about feeling alone despite being surrounded by people, and about his inability to connect with his teammates and family. There were mentions of guilt over not being able to be present for his children, for missing out on their lives while chasing greatness. The realization hit Marcus hard. His father's devotion to basketball had come at an enormous personal cost. It had cost him relationships, family moments, and perhaps even his own happiness. But through it all, Michael had kept pushing, convinced that winning was the only thing that mattered. The letters and journals continued to tell a story of internal conflict and emotional isolation. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more to his father's legacy than the 6 NBA championships, the iconic dunks, the unforgettable moments. What was hidden in these pages revealed a complex, broken man who had done everything to mask his own vulnerabilities and fears. As Marcus finished reading the last journal entry, a sense of deep sadness washed over him. His whole life, he had admired his father's strength. He had prided himself on being his son, feeling the weight of greatness as his own. But now, in the silence of the attic, Marcus realized that his father's strength came not from a lack of fear or doubt, but from the courage to push through them despite feeling overwhelmed. It was something Marcus had never fully understood, something he now had to confront within himself. The attic felt too small, the air too heavy. Marcus felt like a stranger in his own home, like he was learning for the first time what it meant to be Michael Jordan's son. These letters were pieces of a puzzle he had never been able to complete, and they had opened up a floodgate of questions. What had this discovery meant for his future? What had it meant for his identity? As the hours passed, Marcus stayed in the attic, replaying his father's words over and over in his mind. The person he had known as a child, the legend he had admired from afar, was far different than the figure in these pages. Michael Jordan wasn't just the champion everyone had known, he was a father, a husband, a man who struggled with himself and with the very life he had built. When Marcus finally came down from the attic, the sun had already set. His mind was still racing, the letters in his hands now neatly folded and tucked away. As he looked out the window, a sense of confusion and determination filled him. He couldn't ignore what he had found, but at the same time, he couldn't let it define him. His father had sacrificed so much, but Marcus now had to figure out what his own path would look like. It was clear that his journey had just begun.
Marcus woke up the next morning with a heaviness in his chest. The discovery in the attic still weighed on him, and the more he talked about it, the more conflicted he felt. For as long as he could remember, he had lived in the shadow of his father's greatness. Michael Jordan was an icon, untorable, almost godlike. But now, after reading through the letters, Marcus was faced with a new truth. His father had been a man like any other, full of fears and doubts, sacrificing personal happiness for success. His mind kept wandering to the question that had been nagging him since the night before. Who was he, really? Marcus Jordan. Was he just the son of a legend, expected to walk the same path and achieve the same greatness? Or could he carve out his own identity, one that wasn't defined by the shadow of his father? The constant comparisons were exhausting. In basketball, in life, in every conversation, Marcus was always Michael Jordan's son. People did see him, as the legacy. The pressure to live up to that name had been suffocating, but now, knowing what he knew, he wasn't sure if he wanted any part of it. Marcus was a talented basketball player, no doubt. He had the skills, the drive, but every time he stepped onto the court, there was this constant reminder that he was not just any player. He was the son of Michael Jordan, and no matter how hard he tried, that comparison would never go away. His achievements would always be measured against his father's, whether he liked it or not. That morning, Marcus decided to take a break from basketball. He had spent years on the court, pushing himself harder and harder, trying to prove that he could be just as great as his father. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure if that was what he wanted anymore. Maybe he could find a different path, one that didn't come with the same expectations. He spent the day away from the gym, walking around the town, just thinking. The letters had opened up a new perspective for him, and he wasn't sure where it would lead. His father's life had been about winning, about pushing through every obstacle to reach the top. But Marcus had seen the toll it took. The letters showed a man who had sacrificed family, relationships, and his own happiness for the sake of success. Michael Jordan was a living legend, but Marcus wasn't sure if he wanted to follow into the footsteps anymore. Later that afternoon, Marcus received a call from his old high school coach, Coach Daniels. The man had always been a mentor to him, even took Marcus had moved on from high school basketball long ago. Marcus, I heard about your father's passing. I just wanted to check in on you, Coach Daniel said, his voice full of concern. It was a rare moment where Marcus allowed himself to talk about his father. He had kept his emotions bottled up for so long, but something about Coach Daniel's made him feel comfortable enough to open up. It's been took, Marcus admitted. I've been thinking a lot about him, but not just about the player. I found some old letters of his, things he wrote when he was younger. T show a side of him I never knew. Coach Daniels listened quickly, letting Marcus process his talks. After a long pause, he spoke again, this time with a level of wisdom Marcus hadn't expected. You know, Marcus, we all have our demons. We all have our struggles. But your father wasn't just defined by his greatness on the court. He was defined by the way he fought through his personal battles. He made sacrifices, yes, but he also gave everything he had to the game and his family. He wasn't perfect, but he was real. Marcus took a deep breath. It was exactly what he needed to hear. I've been thinking, maybe I should step away from basketball for a while, Marcus confessed. I'm not sure I want to be known only as Michael Jordan's son. I want to figure out who I am without that shadow. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, but when Coach Daniel spoke again, his voice was calm and steady. Marcus, you are not just your father's son. You've got your own story. Maybe it's time for you to write it, but don't think you have to do it alone. You've always had a knack for connecting with people, you said. You've got the power to change lives, even without a basketball in your hands. That hit Marcus harder than anything else. The truth in Coach Daniels words made him realize that there were other ways he could make a difference. Basketball was his connection to his father, but it didn't have to be his pass. He had already accomplished a lot in the game, but maybe there was something else he could do, something that mattered just as much, if not more. That night, Marcus found himself back in the gym, but not to play. He stood on the sidelines, watching the kids on the court. A local youth basketball league was having a practice, and Marcus had been asked to come by and give a few words of encouragement. It was something he had done before, but to nicht, it felt different. He wasn't just the son of Michael Jordan. He was Marcus, someone who had lived a lifetime under the pressure of expectations and who was now trying to figure out how to move forward. The kids were messy, some of them were great, others were still figuring out the basics. But what struck Marcus was their enthusiasm. They weren't playing for fame or fortune, they were playing for the love of the game. It wasn't about being the best, it was about enjoying the moment. They reminded him of where he had started playing in the first place. He took a deep breath and walked onto the court, approaching the coach. Mind if I say a few words? Marcus asked. The coach smiled and handed him the microphone. Marcus hadn't planned to speak, but something in him told him that this was where he was supposed to be. He looked out at the kids, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was competing with his father's legacy. He was just Marcus, a man who had something to offer to the kids, something they needed to hear. I know a thing or two about pressure, Marcus began, his voice steady but full of emotion. My dad, he was a legend. The greatest of all time, he say. But what you don't always hear is that greatness doesn't come easy. It comes with sacrifices, with challenges. It's not always about being the best on the court, it's about learning to play with heart. You don't have to be like anyone else. Just play your game, and that's enough. The room was quiet for a moment. Teen, one of the kids raised his hand. Coach Jordan, the boy said, are you going to teach us how to dunk like your dad? Marcus smiled, a rare laugh escaping him. Maybe some day, kid. But for now, Let's work on the fundamentals. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt the meeting click. It wasn't about following in his father's footsteps. It was about finding his own path and, for once, it didn't have to be defined by the shadow of a legend.
A few weeks had passed since Marcus started coaching the youth basketball team, and the experience had been transformative. What began as a way to escape the pressures of living under his father's shadow had evolved into something far more meaningful. The kids on the team, with their raw passion and energy, had helped him rediscover his own love for the game, one that wasn't tied to fame or expectation but rooted in the joy of playing and teaching others. Marcus had also taken a step back from the high-level basketball he'd once been so consumed by. He realized that he didn't need to be a professional player to have an impact. He didn't need to constantly be compared to Michael Jordan to prove his worth. The work he was doing with the kids gave him something far more fulfilling. He was helping them grow, both on and off the court. It wasn't easy, though. Every day, he faced moments of doubt. The comparisons to his father lingered in his mind. The whispers at the grocery store, the nods of recognition from strangers, people still saw him as Michael Jordan's son. But Marcus had learned to ignore it. What mattered now was the life he was building for himself, and the difference he was making in the lives of the kids he coached. That evening, he sat on the bleachers, watching his team play in their first official game of the season. They weren't the most polished team, but they had heart. Marcus had seen their improvement over the past few weeks, and the energy in the gym that night was electric. The underdogs were giving it everything they had, and that alone made the game worthwhile. With just minutes left in the game, the score was tied. The kids were exhausted, but they kept pushing. Marcus called a timeout to give them a quick pep talk. "Listen up, everyone," he said, his voice firm but encouraging. "This is your game. Forget about the scoreboard. Forget about what anyone else expects. Just play the way we've practiced. Play with heart, and you'll win. Not just the game, but in life." The kids nodded, some wide-eyed, some still catching their breath. Marcus could see the nervous energy in their faces, but also the determination. They wanted to win, but more than that, they wanted to prove to themselves that they could. As the game resumed, Marcus stood along the sideline, watching his team move with a sense of purpose. There was no grand strategy, just the kids playing with everything they had. The final moments were a blur of fast breaks, quick passes, and relentless defense. In the last few seconds, one of the younger players, Devin, the one Marcus had worked with most, made a last-ditch shot that sank through the net as the buzzer went off. The gym erupted. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, but not with the pressure of winning a championship. This wasn't the NBA. It wasn't about legacy or greatness. It was about the pure joy of the game. The victory was theirs, not because they were the best players, but because they had played together as a team, with heart and grit. Later, as the kids celebrated, Marcus sat quietly on the bleachers, watching them. He felt a deep sense of pride, not in himself, but in the journey they had all been on together. For so long, he had been searching for his own place in the world, trying to live up to a legacy that wasn't his to carry. But here, in this gym, with these kids, he had found something that felt more real, more fulfilling. The next day, Marcus received a call from his mother. "I heard about the game last night. Sounds like you're doing well with the kids," she said, her voice soft but full of warmth. "Yeah," Marcus replied, leaning back in his chair. "It's been an amazing experience, Mom. I never thought I'd feel this way about basketball again. But it's not about the fame or the comparisons anymore. It's about helping them grow." His mother paused for a moment. "You're starting to find your own path, Marcus. I'm proud of you. You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations but your own." Her words echoed in his mind as he hung up the phone. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. His mother's words resonated deeply. He was learning to define success on his terms, not based on what others thought he should do, but on what truly mattered to him. The following weekend, Marcus decided to visit the family home in Florida. It was time to take a step forward. He had been avoiding the estate since finding his father's letters in the attic, but now he felt ready to confront the past. He had been carrying that weight for too long, but now he had a new understanding of who his father was, and, more importantly, who he was himself. As he entered the familiar house, memories flooded back, of family gatherings, of the times his father had been present and distant, of the moments he had shared with his father that he had taken for granted. Michael Jordan had been many things, a legend, a father, a man. But Marcus now understood that his legacy wasn't just defined by his championships, his iconic shots, or his relentless pursuit of greatness. His father had been human, and his greatness was in his resilience, and his ability to push through the hardest moments of his life, even when it seemed impossible. Marcus walked upstairs and entered the room where he had found the letters. The box still sat on the desk, its contents carefully folded and tucked inside. He picked it up and took a deep breath. For the first time, he felt no anger, no resentment. Just understanding. He sat down at the desk, opened the box, and reread the letters, letting the words sink in. He wasn't just reading about Michael Jordan anymore. He was reading about a man who had been shaped by his own struggles, just as Marcus had been. Michael's journey had been one of sacrifice and pain, but it had also been one of redemption. Marcus closed the box and put it back in its place. He wasn't going to leave the past behind, but he was ready to move forward. He had his own story to write now. He didn't need to carry the weight of his father's legacy on his shoulders. He had his own path to follow, one where he could be proud of who he was, without needing to measure up to anyone else's expectations. As Marcus left the estate and drove back to the gym, he felt a sense of calm settle over him. The road ahead wasn't always going to be easy, but he was no longer searching for approval or validation. He had found something far more valuable, his own purpose. And that was enough.